Hi, my name is Leuthardt, and I'm excited to talk about the BCI-REHAB trial, a trial that is fundamentally evaluating how BCI rehabilitation therapy compares to home upper extremity therapy in the home environment. Just to start with, disclosures, I do own equity in the company Neurolutions, which I founded, and I have royalty licensing rights to the intellectual property as the inventor of some of this technology. So, to begin with, when we think about chronic stroke, 40% of patients are left with an upper extremity impairment. It's a large population. Importantly, there are limited options for these patients once they get beyond 6 months that can have a meaningful impact. Also important is that they have limited access to advanced therapies. This is especially true for patients in rural communities and underserved populations. So this is where a brain-computer interface can really provide an opportunity to help these patients. Now, when we think about a brain-computer interface, it really consists of 3 parts: sensors, which are pulling signals from the brain; computation, which are taking those signals, processing them so that we can understand the intentions of the user, and converting that to an output that reflects the intentions of the user. Now, thinking about how this is relevant to a brain-computer interface, that when we think about normal motor operation, primary motor cortex is what's responsible for sending signals to the brain that then move the limb. Importantly, premotor or areas of the brain that are involved in motor planning are bihemispheric. So in the setting of stroke, when one side of the brain is injured, those ipsilateral or contralesional regions of the brain are preserved and provide a signal source for a brain-computer interface that can facilitate motor recovery. Now, what we created to capitalize on these signals is the IPSY-hand BCI. What the IPSY-hand BCI does is, first, it has a tablet that walks patients through creating the intent to move their affected limb. The EEG picks up those signals from the unaffected side of the brain and converts those signals to movement of the robotic orthosis that opens and closes the hand consistent with their intentions. Importantly, because a brain-computer interface captures those intentions precisely in time and couples them with sensory feedback from the motor orthotic, that creates a Hebbian environment where things are firing at the same time that can facilitate plasticity and neuronal remodeling. Now, we've done a number of studies that are single-arm in nature, but all of them in the setting of chronic stroke have produced significant motor gains that have surpassed minimally clinically important differences of whether it be Action Research Arm Test or the Fugl-Meyer Upper Extremity Assessment. But importantly, in addition to just seeing clinical benefits, this isn't just compensation. Rather, what we're seeing fundamentally is changes in the brain itself. And whether we look at EEG or functional imaging, we do see changes. Specifically, when EEG is recorded before and after doing BCI therapy for 12 weeks, we see changes in what's called theta-gamma coupling, how a slow rhythm entrains higher frequency cortical rhythms over motor cortex. Similarly, when we look at resting state functional MRI and look at connectivity, we see fundamental connectivity changes in both hemispheres of the brain and motor regions that you don't see with physical therapy. Also importantly is when we look at how these physiologic signals change over time, that they do track with the improvements that patients see, both in the physiology and the imaging. So this system was ultimately given a breakthrough designation status in 2020. It was FDA cleared in 2021. It was made commercially available in 2023. So now the real next question that we wanted to examine in this study is to evaluate the efficacy of BCI therapy when we test it against standard exercise therapy that chronic stroke patients do every day, and evaluate the potential for a meaningful motor improvement in the home environment. So this study designed for you. After patients were enrolled, they first had an EEG screening. Can we detect that ipsilateral motor signal? Once those signals were detected, those patients were randomized either to BCI therapy or to a home exercise program. Before starting that intervention, they did a baseline evaluation, and then they did 12 weeks of therapy, either BCI therapy or the control of home exercise therapy, 5 of 7 days per week for 12 weeks. And after the conclusion of that, they did another assessment. For our study population, the inclusion criterion was age of 18 to 85 years. They had to be greater than 6 months out from their stroke, and they had to have an upper extremity hemiparesis or hemiplegia. Importantly, for exclusion criterion, they couldn't have cognitive impairments preventing them from understanding or informed consent. They couldn't be participating in any other studies. They couldn't have any contractures, receptive aphasia, or unilateral visual attention that could prohibit their participation in this study. Our primary outcome measure was the upper extremity Fugl-Meyer. This is a well understood and well accepted metric across regulatory and trials. Importantly, it's got great scientific and clinical strengths. Specifically, it has excellent inter- and intra-rater reliability, strong construct validity, and a high sensitivity to clinically meaningful changes. And it has an established, minimally clinically important difference of 5.25 points. So, another important feature of the study was compliance. That we defined compliance as greater than 80% adherence to the prescribed BCI intervention of 5 days a week for 7 days. So also, this is something that we could monitor through the system itself. For the home exercise program, this was monitored through self-reporting journal daily logs that were attested at the end of this completion. So walking through the consort diagram, 108 patients were assessed for eligibility. 85 were randomized. I think one thing that I want to highlight, only 10 of those 109 failed to produce an EEG signal. So the majority of patients do have that ipsilateral signal. Now, once randomized, there was 43 to the BCI intervention, 42 to control. An important thing to highlight, 17 patients of the control withdrew due to the dissatisfaction to the assignment. The way I would interpret this is while we as clinicians have equipoise in this trial, the patients did not and wanted to be in the treatment arm. So ultimately we had 62 patients in the primary analysis, 37 to BCI and 25 to control. Now, looking at the pretreatment patient characteristics, the average age of these patients was 56.6 years with a Caucasian and male predominance. As far as baseline neurologic function, the average upper extremity Fugl-Meyer measurement was 26.5, which puts them into the moderate to severely affected range. And finally, from a stroke chronicity standpoint, the mean time from the time of their stroke was 5.5 years. So these were notably chronic stroke survivors. Now, looking at the results for kind of how these patients did with their therapy, in aggregate, the BCI patients did better than the home exercise program. Breaking this down a little bit, when we looked at the Fugl-Meyer Part A in terms of gross motor movements, we didn't see meaningful differences, but we start to see more substantive differences with Part B and C when it comes to wrist and hand movements, and certainly differences in Part D as it relates to motor coordination. Now, looking at this more quantitatively and numerically, when we compare the outcome of upper extremity Fugl-Meyer, our primary outcome, the BCI patients had a gain of 6 points versus the home exercise therapy, which had a gain of 1.5. That gives us a difference of 4.5 points, which was substantially and significantly different. When we look at response rate, meaning how many patients gained an improvement that's better than the minimally clinically important difference, 55.5% of the BCI-treated patients achieved that threshold. For the home exercise program, only 9.6% of patients achieved that threshold. That's a 5.8 multiple difference. Taken in aggregate, for the number of patients needed to treat to see a clinical benefit, it's 2.2 patients. To conclude, chronic stroke recovery is not biologically closed. At home, non-invasive BCI therapy produced clinically meaningful motor recovery where standard therapy did not. Importantly, the effect size and response rate rival or exceed many of the accepted stroke interventions despite occurring years after this injury. Also particularly exciting is that recovery was achieved at home without surgery without inpatient rehab, without robotics, and without continuous therapy supervision. So, taken together, BCI therapy is a new restorative therapeutic class that reframes chronic stroke from a compensated condition to a treatable one. This is a therapy that's available today. And let me finish by acknowledging both the NIH for supporting this study as well as Neurolutions and the many people who participated to making this happen. Thank you very much.